The jungle wasn't supposed to be alive at night, not like this. The leaves didn't rustle, they whispered. The air didn't move, it watched. When the platoon entered that unmarked valley, they thought they were tracking deserters. But what they found were camps torn apart, helmets crushed like paper, and drag marks leading into the trees. The radio transmissions were the first sign, wet, gurgling sounds, followed by screams cut short mid-breath. By dawn, all contact was gone. Locals spoke of something older than the war itself, a predator that waited for silence. The few who went searching never came back with proof. Only stories of eyes that gleamed like fireflies and movement too fast for any man. Weeks later, a drone captured one final image before its feed died. Soldiers running through fog, and something massive crawling after them on all fours. No one could say what it was. But the blood trails said one thing clearly: the hunters had become the hunted. The orders came at midnight, sealed, brief, and without insignia. No insignia meant no record, and no record meant the mission didn't exist. Captain Vance had done enough covert operations to know when something was off. But this was different. The coordinates led to a patch of jungle not even marked on military maps, a place the satellite skipped over as if something was erasing it. The briefing claimed it was a reconnaissance task, simple search and recover. But the eyes of the officer delivering it told a different story. They were sending them into something no one else would touch. The transport helicopter roared over the endless green, its rotors carving through fog that never seemed to clear. The team, 8 men and 1 woman, joked half-heartedly, trying to push down the sense of unease gnawing at their nerves. Beneath them, the canopy rippled like a living sea. No villages, no roads, the pilot muttered through static. It's like the land itself doesn't want to be found. Vance just nodded. He'd learned long ago that fear always had good instincts. When the bird descended, every man felt it. The pressure in the air, the weight of silence swallowing the world whole. They landed in a clearing where the trees bent inward like ribs, forming a cage. The moment the rotors stopped, the jungle reclaimed the sound. No insects, no birds, just windless, unnatural stillness. The air was thick with the smell of iron and wet earth. Sergeant Mills took the first step, his boots sinking into mud that looked too dark, like it had soaked up something it shouldn't have. "Feels wrong," he said. Vance didn't answer. He didn't have to. Every soldier there felt it too. Their mission file contained only one name: Operation Mute Soil. No objective, no extraction plan, no confirmation code. The only directive read: investigate site, record findings, burn everything else. The more they read, the colder the air seemed to get. It wasn't reconnaissance. It was containment. The kind of assignment you don't survive to debrief. Still, they pushed forward. Orders were orders, even the kind whispered in dark rooms. The first sign of trouble came with the compass. It spun aimlessly, refusing to point anywhere. The GPS blinked erratically, repeating the same coordinates no matter how far they moved. It was as if the jungle was a loop, infinite, endless. "We're walking in circles," Mills growled, wiping sweat and dirt from his neck. But the map said otherwise. The ground beneath them was changing, firmer, colder, as if something below was hard and hollow. By the 3rd hour, Private Laramie caught the scent, a thick, sour odor that burned the back of the throat. "Something dead," he muttered. But when they found the source, it wasn't an animal. It was a soldier. Or what was left of one. The uniform was unrecognizable. The flesh peeled and stretched as if something had tried to wear it. Flies clung to the remains. But they weren't feeding, they were escaping. Even the insects wanted nothing to do with what was left on the ground. Vance crouched, staring at the mangled face. The dog tags had been torn off, but a tattoo on the arm revealed the impossible. The insignia of their own division. "This guy's one of ours," Vance said. "But this unit's been missing for months." The jungle around them seemed to exhale. The leaves rustled though there was no wind. "Sir," Mills whispered, "what if we're not the first team they sent?" Night came early in that place. Too early. The sun dropped like a stone, and within minutes, they were blind. Flashlights barely cut through the mist, the beams bending as if swallowed by the air itself. They made camp reluctantly, taking shifts, weapons loaded. At 0200 hours, the radio cracked to life with faint static, then a voice. It was wet, uneven, and broken by gasps. "It's still hungry." Everyone froze. The signal wasn't on any known frequency, but the voice was clear. It belonged to their missing pilot from last month's mission. Mills tried to trace the signal, but the radio fried instantly, smoke curling from its circuits. How the hell, he started. But Vance raised a hand. In the distance, something moved, a flicker of shadow between the trees. The shape was too large to be human, yet it crawled low, dragging something heavy behind it. The sound wasn't footsteps. It was dragging, slow, deliberate, wet. They opened fire. The gunfire lit up the trees, but the jungle didn't echo. Every shot was swallowed whole. When the light faded, the shape was gone, but the smell remained, metallic, rotten, alive. Laramie whispered, "That wasn't human." Vance didn't argue. His gut told him the same thing. Whatever they had seen, it hadn't run away. It was waiting for them to move. At dawn, they found the first boot prints, deep, clawed, and half the size of a man's. The soil around them was dry, but the prints dripped with dark fluid, as if freshly made. "It's tracking us," Mills said. The realization hit like shrapnel. They weren't hunting anything. They were being herded. The valley wasn't a location, it was a trap, and they'd just walked straight into it. As they advanced deeper, they began to find more remains, not full corpses but fragments. An arm here, a jaw there. But the strangest part was that the wounds didn't match any known animal attack. The tissue was torn in clean spirals, like something had unwrapped the flesh layer by layer. "Looks like feeding," Vance said quietly, but Mills shook his head. "No, looks like asterisk learning." The deeper they went, the colder it became. The jungle should have been humid, but the air turned crisp, biting. Frost began to form on their rifles. It made no sense. The vegetation glistened with ice under a tropical sun. "We're not in the same place anymore," Laramie muttered. He was right. They weren't. The coordinates had stopped updating completely. It was as if the world had folded around them. By the 9th hour, they reached a clearing, circular, impossibly perfect. In the center stood a half-buried structure, concrete and steel, military-built. "Base camp?" Mills asked. Vance stepped forward, brushing off vines to reveal a faded logo, the emblem of their own branch. But below it, scratched deep into the metal, were 3 words. Asterisk. Asterisk. Do not enter again. That night, as they camped near the structure, something prowled beyond the firelight. They could hear it, breathing slow, steady, patient. Not the ragged pant of a beast, but the rhythm of something that knew them. Each time one of them spoke, the breathing paused, as if listening. Vance gripped his rifle tighter, staring into the dark. This mission, he whispered, wasn't about finding something. He looked at the glowing red eyes that flickered beyond the tree line. It was about making sure it never left. The jungle was never silent, not even at night. There was always something moving, frogs croaking, insects buzzing, the wind whispering through leaves. But in this valley, silence had weight. It pressed against their eardrums, thick and alive. The team had been moving for hours, flashlights flickering as the mist coiled around their legs. Even the trees looked wrong here, their trunks twisted inward, bark smooth like skin, as though the forest had grown from something that wasn't earth at all. Private Hale was the first to notice it. "Something's pacing us," he whispered. The others froze, rifles raised, scanning the shadows. The beam of a flashlight sliced between the trees. Nothing, just fog shifting like smoke. But then came the sound, a low rustle, not of leaves but of breath, deep and steady. It moved with them, matching every step, stopping when they stopped, watching when they turned. Captain Vance signaled a halt. "Hold positions," he mouthed. They crouched low, eyes wide, listening. The forest seemed to lean closer, as if eavesdropping. Then from somewhere deep in the dark came a soft click, like bones cracking in rhythm. "Animal," whispered Mills. Vance shook his head. "Animals don't stalk patrols in formation." The air smelled like copper and rot. Hale's flashlight flickered again, and in that brief flash they saw it. A shape between the trunks, tall and hunched, its arms hanging too long, its face hidden behind something that looked like stretched skin. Then it was gone, melting back into the blackness like a shadow retreating from light. The soldiers didn't speak. They just looked at each other, every instinct screaming run. Vance broke the silence. "We keep moving, no stopping until we reach higher ground." His voice was calm, but his hand trembled on the rifle. They advanced slowly, boots sinking into mud that seemed to pulse faintly underfoot. The jungle wasn't just alive, it was listening. Every crunch of dirt, every inhale, seemed to echo back from unseen mouths. The deeper they went, the more the forest felt like a trap that breathed with them. An hour later, Private Laramie stumbled over something buried in the mud. He bent down, brushed away the dirt, and froze. It was a helmet, half dissolved in rust, but still showing a logo identical to their own units. He turned it over and found a nameplate. It was his own name. The metal was old, years corroded, impossible. He dropped it instantly. "This isn't funny," he muttered. No one laughed. Suddenly, movement rippled through the tree line. Fast, erratic, circling them. Flashlights swung wildly, catching flashes of motion. Long fingers gripping bark, pale limbs darting between trunks. The air turned cold, their breath visible even in the tropical heat. "Contact, right flank," shouted Mills, opening fire. The gunfire shredded through leaves, but the echo didn't come back. The bullets seemed to vanish mid-air. Then came the smell again. That sickly sweet rot. Something wet hit Vance's shoulder. He reached up and found his fingers slick with blood. From above, a half-eaten carcass dropped onto the dirt. A soldier's torso, ribs torn open like paper. It wasn't old. The flesh was still steaming. "Eyes up," Vance barked, flashlight darting toward the canopy. Between the branches, something moved. Fast, massive, wrong. The canopy shook violently. Leaves rained down. "It's in the trees," Hale screamed. They fired upward, muzzle flashes, lighting the forest in strobe bursts. For seconds at a time, they caught glimpses. A face that wasn't a face, a mouth too wide, too full of teeth. Then it leapt, crashing down behind them with a sound like snapping timber. The ground itself seemed to shudder. Panic spread. Laramie broke formation, sprinting into the fog. "Fall back," Vance yelled, but the fog swallowed his voice. The next sound they heard was Laramie screaming, high, choked, ending abruptly in a wet crunch. They fired blindly into the white, but nothing moved. When the fog cleared seconds later, Laramie's rifle lay upright, still warm, planted barrel first in the soil like a grave marker. Mills tried the radio again, desperate. Static answered, then a faint voice whispering. It was Laramie. "Don't let it hear you." Mills froze, eyes wide. "Captain, he's..." But before he could finish, the same voice came again from the opposite side of the clearing. Identical. "Don't let it hear you." The sound looped, bouncing from every direction. The creature was repeating him, mocking him. The team tightened their perimeter, backs to each other, rifles raised. The mist began to move, spiraling around them, and inside it shapes formed, not quite human, not quite animal. The outlines of soldiers, walking wrong, bending at impossible angles. "Sir," whispered Hale, "they look like us." Vance didn't respond. He was staring at one figure that mirrored his exact stance, his exact rifle, his exact face, smiling through the fog. A shriek tore through the clearing, guttural and human at once. The shapes lunged. Gunfire exploded. Screams followed. In the chaos, Vance caught sight of something crawling from the tree line, pale, muscular, and covered in faces. Dozens of them. Human faces, half digested, stretching and gasping for air. It screamed again, but the sound wasn't a roar. It was the echo of their own gunfire, played backward. The survivors ran. Branches whipped their faces, the ground slick with blood and mud. The jungle itself seemed to shift, trees twisting behind them like closing doors. Vance stumbled, catching his breath, realizing too late they were back in the same clearing they started in. The compass spun again. The map was useless. The valley wasn't a place. It was a loop. Something stepped into the light, tall, trembling, and wearing Laramie's torn uniform. Its face twitched, reshaping itself with every breath, mouths opening across its neck, whispering words in a dozen voices. "Orders, complete," it hissed. Vance raised his rifle, but his finger froze on the trigger. The creature tilted its head and spoke again, this time in his own voice. "Stand down, Captain." He didn't remember pulling the trigger, only the flash. When the smoke cleared, the thing was gone. Only the trees remained, dripping with something black. The radio on his vest clicked once more, faint static giving way to his own voice, repeating the words he'd just heard. "Stand down, Captain. But ding pian was Simbi Tir." And from somewhere deeper in the forest, that voice, his voice, answered back. The jungle had gone beyond silent, it was deaf. Even their own voices seemed to die the moment they left their throats, swallowed by the air like sound was being erased. The fog had grown thicker, drifting low and heavy, turning every tree into a silhouette. The team marched cautiously, the metallic click of their rifles muffled as if wrapped in cotton. Captain Vance tried to call out for Mills, but the words didn't travel. His mouth moved, his lungs strained, yet nothing came back. It was like shouting underwater. Then came the first scream. Sharp, desperate, yet wrong. It didn't echo, didn't bounce from the trees. It simply vanished, sucked into the mist. Everyone froze, blood draining from their faces. Direction? Hale-mouthed, pointing into the white void. No one knew. The sound had no origin. It was everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through their bones instead of their ears. Vance signaled a split formation, half the team to flank, half to hold. They moved slow, rifles raised, breaths shallow. The scream came again, closer this time, broken by choking gasps. Hale bolted forward, unable to resist, and the others followed. When they reached the source, all they found was a helmet lying beside a pool of black water. The helmet was dented inward, claw marks along the rim. Steam rose from the water, as if the ground itself was breathing. "Sergeant Mills." Vance shouted again, but his voice came out hollow. The sound carried only a few feet before dying, swallowed whole. Then faintly, behind him, came an echo. His own voice, repeating the same words, delayed by seconds. But it wasn't a real echo, it was distorted, like something imitating him through static. Hale turned pale. That's your voice, sir." They pressed on. The trees seemed to close tighter, their roots twisting like veins beneath the soil. The fog thinned just enough for them to see movement. A shadow stumbling between trunks, hands reaching, body jerking unnaturally. Mills lifted his weapon. "Hold your fire," Vance ordered. They approached carefully, and as the light hit the figure, it became clear it was one of theirs. Private Renner. His eyes were wide, his mouth stretched open mid-scream, but no sound came out. His throat moved, convulsing, yet the forest remained silent. Hale reached out. "Renner, can you hear?" Before he could finish, Renner turned toward them. His jaw unhinged with a wet crack, opening wider than any human mouth should. No sound came, but blood poured out like ink. His body convulsed, limbs snapping backward until he collapsed, twitching. The air around him shimmered, vibrating faintly, and then the scream finally came, delayed, hollow, coming from every direction at once. The team fired wildly. The scream blended with their gunfire, merging into a horrific drone that vibrated in their skulls. But again, no echo, no response. It was as if the bullets themselves were silent. When the sound stopped, Renner's body was gone, leaving only deep grooves in the mud, as if something had dragged him downward. Vance ordered them to fall back toward the clearing, but none of them could tell which way they came. The compass spun uselessly. Even their footprints disappeared seconds after they made them. "We're in a sound trap," Vance muttered, realizing it too late. Every noise they made, every shout, every breath, it wasn't leaving the forest, it was being collected. Then they heard whispering. low and soft, weaving through the trees like a breeze. It wasn't words at first, just patterns, rhythms. Then, slowly, they recognized their own voices. Each whisper repeated something they had said minutes earlier. Commands, curses, names. The forest was playing them back. Hale dropped to his knees, clutching his ears, shouting, "Make it stop." But the more he yelled, the louder the whispers became. The radio crackled. A faint, broken transmission came through. "Don't speak, it listens." The voice was Mills. Vance froze. Mills had been missing since the first scream. The others turned in every direction, scanning the fog. Then a figure appeared. Mills, or what was left of him. His skin looked stretched thin, his eyes sunken, his uniform shredded, his mouth opened, and the sound that came out was dozens of voices. Every scream they'd heard, all at once. Vance fired. The shot tore through the body, but it didn't fall. The mist bent around it, rippling like disturbed water. The creature, whatever it was, took a step forward, dragging sound with it. Every noise the soldiers made began to vanish. Gunfire, shouts, the rustle of gear. Soon, even their heartbeats went quiet. They weren't just losing sound, they were losing presence. Private Hale's mouth moved as he screamed. But there was no sound, no breath, only the look of absolute terror frozen on his face. One by one, the soldiers faded into the fog, swallowed not by death but by silence itself. Only Vance remained, clutching his radio, trembling. The whispers had stopped. The forest was waiting for him to speak. He raised the radio slowly, pressing the transmit button. Static answered, faint and distant. Then his own voice came back, distorted and ancient. "We never stopped screaming." The forest responded with one final breath, a gust that carried the echo of 1,000 voices trapped between the trees. And then, once again, absolute silence. Days later, when a search unit entered the valley, they found no bodies, no blood, no signs of battle. Just rifles standing upright in the mud, arranged in a circle, all pointing inward. And when the wind blew through the branches, for the briefest second, it sounded like a scream, one that didn't echo back. The camp was supposed to be their safe zone. Perimeter lights, reinforced tents, and a sense of order amidst chaos. But that night, no one slept. The jungle had gone still again, listening. Even the fire refused to crackle, its flame a weak orange pulse trembling in the damp air. Captain Vance stared at the dirt beneath his boots, the same patch they'd been camped on for 2 nights. It felt wrong, soft, almost spongy, like it was breathing. He couldn't shake the feeling that the ground itself was waiting. At dawn, Mills and Hale began digging trenches for drainage. The soil was dark, too dark, and smelled of iron. Hale jabbed his shovel in once more, and it clanged. Metal, maybe a buried container. But when they brushed away the dirt, they found something smooth, wet, and pale. It wasn't metal, it was flesh, a surface of slick tissue stretched tight, like skin over bone. Hale stumbled back, gagging. "That's not ground," he whispered. Vance ordered everyone to clear the area and called for the medic to inspect it. The moment their gloves touched the surface, it twitched, faintly, like something alive flinching from light. The soldiers froze. A vibration rolled through the soil, subtle at first, then deep enough to rattle the tents. The earth itself was breathing, pulsing beneath their feet, like the chest of a sleeping beast. "Captain," the medic whispered, "it's organic." Before Vance could respond, the radio crackled to life again. Static bled through, followed by a voice, low, rasping, wet, "You're standing on it." Everyone looked down. The ground shifted again, a long, slow inhale. Then came the smell, sweet and foul, the scent of rot and blood mixed with the sterile tang of hospital disinfectant. Hale dropped his rifle and stepped back. "Sir," he stammered, "what the hell is this place?" They tried to retreat, but the forest had changed overnight. The tree line had moved. Closer now, encircling the camp like ribs around a heart. The mist thickened until it felt solid, the air humming with a faint heartbeat that wasn't theirs. Then a scream erupted from the trench. One of the engineers had fallen in, but when they looked down, he wasn't in a hole. He was sinking into the ground itself. the soil folding over him like mussel swallowing prey. Mills lunged forward to grab him, but the man was already half gone, his screams muffled by the pulsing earth. When Vance fired into the pit, the bullets didn't spark or ricochet, they disappeared, absorbed like drops into water. Then, in the next second, the trench erupted. A geyser of blood and black sludge sprayed across the camp, carrying bits of uniform and bone. The pit had spat him back out, but not the same. What landed wasn't a body. It was a hollow shell, skin inflated like a balloon, eyes wide open but empty. It twitched, as if still alive, before collapsing into itself. The stench was unbearable. Vance ordered them to burn the remains, but when Hale struck the lighter, the flame flickered, blue, then white, and refused to catch. The flesh didn't burn. It pulsed, and from deep below, something groaned. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was alive. It reverberated through the earth, a guttural, mournful bellow that seemed to stretch for miles. The ground rippled like liquid beneath their boots, and the trees shook though no wind blew. The radios screamed with feedback, then fell silent. For the first time, even the jungle stopped breathing. Hours passed before anyone spoke again. They huddled near the fireless pit, trying to make sense of what they'd seen. "It's a nest," Mills said finally. "Whatever's out there, it lays them here." Vance shook his head. "No," he murmured. "This isn't a nest." He pointed toward the faint outlines of human shapes pressed beneath the translucent surface. Arms, faces, torsos half merged with the ground. "It's feeding." Hale's light caught something else. The faces weren't still, they were moving. Lips twitching, eyes rolling beneath the thin film of flesh. One mouth opened, silently forming a word, then another. Within seconds, the entire surface began to ripple with motion. Hundreds of half-buried bodies whispering, struggling beneath the skin. Their movements created a faint rhythm that almost sounded like speech. "Help us." Vance stumbled back, horrified. The ground convulsed, and one of the shapes began to push upward, stretching the membrane. A hand broke through, human, trembling, slick with blood. Mills tried to pull it free, but the fingers latched onto his wrist with inhuman strength. The hand began to drag him downward, nails digging into his skin. Hale swung his machete, severing the grip. Mills fell back, bleeding, the severed hand still twitching beside him. They fled toward the northern ridge, abandoning the tents and supplies. The earth heaved behind them, like something enormous turning in its sleep. As they ran, the jungle floor split open in a massive tear, and for the first time, they saw the pit for what it was. A gaping maw of flesh and bone, teeth like rib bones curving inward, pulsing with veins that glowed faintly red beneath translucent skin. The camp hadn't been built on solid ground at all. It had been built on the creature itself. The radios came alive again, screeching with distortion. Between bursts of static, a voice whispered, "Don't move, it feels vibration." They froze. The ground around them quivered like jelly. Hale mouthed silently, pointing toward a fallen tree. One by one, they crawled, inching across the slick earth. Beneath them, the veins pulsed faster, reacting to their movement. The surface began to open and close rhythmically, breathing faster. Hale was the first to slip. His boot sank deep, up to the knee. He tried to pull free, but the flesh tightened around him like a muscle contracting. The others grabbed his arms, pulling, straining, but the suction was too strong. With a wet pop, his leg tore free, but the rest of him didn't. Blood splattered across the dirt, steaming in the cold air, and then, beneath their hands, the ground smiled. The fissure widened into a gash lined with bone-white teeth. Vance didn't hesitate. He threw a grenade into the pit and ran. The explosion was dull, muffled, the ground absorbed it like a sponge. Then came the groan again, louder, angrier. The pit began to pulse violently, spraying gore and steam into the air. "Move!" he shouted. The survivors sprinted toward the ridge, their boots slipping on blood-soaked mud. Behind them, the flesh pit began to rise, the ground lifting like a tidal wave. When they reached the ridge, Vance looked back. The camp was gone, consumed. All that remained was a massive crater of glistening tissue, veins glowing faintly in the moonlight. In its center, something writhed, enormous, faceless, breathing. The trees bent away from it as if afraid. The radio on Vance's chest crackled one last time, whispering in a voice that wasn't human, "You fed it." And as the dawn broke, the pit sank slowly back into the earth, sealing itself shut as if nothing had ever been there. Only the smell remained, the stench of flesh, blood, and something worse. The jungle had swallowed its secret again, and above the ground, the wind began to blow for the first time in days, carrying faint, wordless screams rising from somewhere deep below. When the sun went down, so did their signal. The radio had been crackling all day, its static a constant reminder that someone, somewhere might still be listening. But by nightfall it went dead. No frequency, no ping, just silence. Captain Vance tried every channel, even the emergency military bands. Nothing. The jungle pressed in around them, dark and alive, the air vibrating faintly like it was carrying whispers just below human hearing. The only sound left was the soft hum of the radio's dying battery. At first, they thought it was interference. Hal had been adjusting the antenna when the static changed pitch. Soft, rhythmic, almost breathing. Then came a sound beneath it. Not words, just faint tapping. Mills leaned in. "That's not random," he whispered. "It's Morse." They listened closely, translating between crackles. "Stay, still, under." The message looped 3 times, then cut off. "Command," Vance said into the mic, but the moment his voice hit the radio, the signal distorted violently. His words came back, seconds later, but warped, deeper, slower, like something was repeating him from inside the static. Hale yanked the battery cord out, but the radio kept running. The power light flickered red, even though it was disconnected. "How's that thing still on?" Mills asked. No one answered. They decided to bury it. Hale dug a shallow hole, dropped the radio in, and covered it with dirt. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then, muffled beneath the soil, the static returned. Louder this time, pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the earth. "Sir," Hale whispered. "It's stronger underground." Vance stared into the dirt, his own reflection faintly visible in the slick black mud. "We're not alone," he said finally. That night, the air turned cold. Their breath fogged in front of their faces, and even the insects were gone. Vance sat beside the buried radio, watching the dirt move in small, trembling ripples. Then, faintly, he heard it again, his own voice. "We're not alone," it said, repeating what he had said earlier perfectly. The others woke to the sound and gathered around. The voice grew louder, more distorted, until it wasn't just Vance's anymore, it was all of them, overlapping in a chorus of their own words. Mills panicked, grabbing his rifle and firing into the dirt. The sound didn't echo, it was swallowed, absorbed. The ground shuddered, and the radio rose back to the surface, clean, untouched, its metal casing gleaming wetly in the moonlight. The speaker crackled once more, then whispered a new phrase, "You buried the wrong thing." The team froze. None of them dared move. By morning, their comms had reset. The radio acted normal again, reading standard frequencies. Hope flickered. Maybe the storm had caused it. Maybe it was just a glitch. But then Hale called out from the perimeter. "Captain," he said, "we've got movement on Channel 4. Vance pressed his headset to listen. The voice was faint but distinct. "Sergeant Owens, one of the men from the first lost unit. Alpha Team, do you copy?" he said. "We found shelter, coordinates incoming." Vance's chest tightened. Owens had been missing for 3 months. "Owens, this is Vance. What's your position?" he asked. Silence. Then slowly the voice came back, clearer. "Behind you." They spun around. Nothing. Just fog and trees. But the radio kept talking. "We're right here." The sound began to layer, dozens of overlapping voices, all repeating the same phrase, until it felt like the forest itself was speaking. The team backed up, weapons raised. The static rose to a screech, then cut off abruptly. In the silence that followed, Vance realized something horrifying. The radio wasn't transmitting out. It was receiving something that didn't need a signal, something close. Mills crouched near the device, his hand shaking. "Sir, there's no antenna," he whispered. Vance looked down. He was right. The antenna had been ripped off hours ago. Then the voice changed. It was Hale's. "Captain?" It said clear and calm. "Captain, can you hear me?" But Hale was standing right next to him. "That's not me," he whispered. The voice on the radio continued. "Don't look behind you." They didn't. They couldn't. But something was moving. Slow, deliberate, circling them. Its footsteps were soft, squelching in the mud, and with every step, the radio clicked once. The ground started to tremble. The signal bled into their headsets, no longer confined to the radio. The same voice repeated through each earpiece, not in sync, but staggered, as if traveling through each soldier's mind separately. "Contact re-established," it said. "Target acquired." Vance tore off his headset, but he still heard it, from inside his skull. Mills screamed, clutching his ears, blood dripping from his nose. The static wasn't sound anymore. It was inside them. Then came the laughter, soft, wet, human, like a child imitating an adult's chuckle. The radio flickered to life again, its red light pulsing faster and faster. The voices blended into a single tone that made their teeth ache. "Mission complete," it said, calm and robotic. "Return to base." But there was no base, no signal, no direction. Only the forest. Vance shouted into the mic, "Who are you?" The voice replied instantly, "You are." Panic tore through the group. They smashed the radio, stomped it into the dirt until it cracked open. The speaker still worked, dangling wires sparking faintly. "Don't leave me," it whispered. The words came from deep inside the broken casing, too natural, too human. Then, beneath the speaker, they found something impossible. A tooth. Small, human, perfectly intact. They left the device and ran until dawn. But even as the sun rose, the sound followed, faint static bleeding through their helmets. The same phrase looping endlessly. "Contact re-established." Hale begged Vance to take off his comms, but the moment he did, he went quiet, standing perfectly still, eyes wide, as if listening to something only he could hear. A moment later, he turned and walked into the trees without a word. When they tried to call him back, his voice came through the radio again, calm and steady. "All clear. Proceed forward." They followed the sound until the trail ended abruptly at a clearing. There was no Hale, no footprints, no sign of life. Only a single radio sitting on a rock, perfectly clean, the speaker humming faintly. Vance reached for it, his reflection staring back from the metal surface. "Alpha Team," it said, "contact lost." The radio fell silent for the last time, and Vance finally understood they hadn't lost contact. The radio hadn't been transmitting them. It had been replacing them, one voice at a time. By the time the storm rolled in, half the unit was gone. The air was thick with moisture, every breath tasting like rust and mold. Captain Vance ordered what was left of his men to dig in near the ridge, the only high ground for miles. The fog had swallowed the valley below, pulsing faintly with flashes of light that weren't lightning. Every man stayed silent, listening to the soft, rhythmic clicking that came from the dark. It sounded almost like speech, but not quite. The rain began in whispers, falling in slow, uneven drops. Hale crouched near the fire, his eyes hollow, clutching his rifle like a charm against the unknown. "It's calling us," he muttered. "Every night, it calls a new one." Mills looked up. "Calls who?" Hale didn't answer. He just stared into the mist, where shapes moved just beyond sight, like figures walking underwater. Then, faintly, something called his name. The voice was perfect, not close, not far, but precise. "Private Hale," it said, calm and clear, the exact tone of Captain Vance. Hale froze. "Sir?" he called out. The voice came again, identical, down to the breath between words. "Report to the tree line." Vance shook his head immediately. "That's not me." But it was too late. Hale stood, rifle trembling, and began walking toward the fog. They chased after him, shouting his name, but he didn't turn back. When they reached the tree line, he was gone. Only the faint sound of his boots crunching in the mud remained, then nothing. Moments later, the radio on his vest crackled to life. "This is Private Hale, reporting," the voice said. "Contact made." The signal cut out, leaving only static that somehow sounded like breathing. Vance tried to keep the men steady, but their nerves were splintering. The fog carried whispers now, dozens of them, all familiar. Voices of men they'd lost. Some laughed, others cried, all speaking their names with perfect clarity. "It knows who we are," Mills said. "It's learning." He wasn't wrong. Each night, the voice grew more fluent, the tone more human. It began asking questions, personal ones. "Do you miss your home? Do you still dream?" They stopped using names altogether, addressing each other only by hand signals. But the beast, whatever it was, didn't need voices anymore. It started mimicking footsteps, breathing patterns, even the small coughs and ticks each man had. Once, while on watch, Vance turned to ask Mills a question, only to find Mills fast asleep. The sound beside him hadn't been Mills at all. It had been breathing with him. On the fifth night, something new appeared in the fog, movement that wasn't random. A silhouette, tall and narrow, moving on all fours with a terrible grace. When the lightning flashed, it stood upright for a moment, almost human, before dropping back down. Vance ordered everyone to hold fire, but one man panicked. The shot echoed through the trees, and the echo came back saying his name. The creature answered with sound, perfect mimicry. Each gunshot, each word, came back rearranged, distorted, like a machine trying to learn speech. "Stop firing," Vance barked. But his order came back seconds later from the fog, his own voice saying it slower, deeper, wrong. The forest erupted into chaos as soldiers fired at their own echoes. When the smoke cleared, 3 men were gone. At dawn, Vance found tracks circling the camp, clawed, heavy, but arranged deliberately, almost in a pattern. At the center of those tracks lay a single helmet, Hale's. Inside, written in blood, was one word: listen. The radio flared to life again, this time not static but laughter, distorted, echoing, breaking into sobs. The voice whispered through every channel, "I know your names now." Vance smashed the radio, but the laughter continued. Not from the speakers, but from the trees. The fog itself seemed to vibrate, forming faint outlines of mouths, hundreds of them whispering in unison. Each voice was one of his men. "Captain Vance," they said together, "why did you leave us?" He stumbled back, his breath visible, his heart hammering. The air was cold, too cold. The thing was close. Then, out of the mist, Hale stepped forward, or something wearing Hale's skin. His body was twisted, his limbs too long, his face blank, except for the mouth. When he spoke, the sound came from everywhere at once. "It remembers everything we said," he croaked. Every word. He lifted his rifle and aimed it at Vance, but his hands were shaking. "It's still hungry." They fired. The body fell, collapsing in on itself like wet paper, but the sound didn't stop. The name-calling continued, louder now, deeper, the beast growing more confident. It no longer whispered, it roared. Each shout was a name, each roar a memory. It wasn't hunting anymore, it was reciting, rehearsing, learning how to be them. That night, Vance stayed awake, staring into the fog. For hours, nothing moved. Then a single voice broke the silence, his own, clear and calm. "Captain Vance," it said, "report." He gripped his weapon, whispering to himself, "Don't answer." But then, behind him, Mill's voice came, soft, terrified. "Sir, it's right behind us." Vance turned slowly, heart pounding. Mills wasn't there. The fog shifted, parting just enough for him to see it. The shape of something enormous. Crouched in the dark, skin glistening, hundreds of mouths moving across its surface. Each one whispered a different name. His name came last. The sound was perfect. His exact voice, whispering from its many throats, "Captain Vance." Then, in unison, every mouth smiled. He opened fire, screaming as the recoil tore his shoulder. The bullets vanished into the mist. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it laughed. a sound that grew louder and louder, until it became a chorus of every man's voice he'd ever commanded. "You taught us how to speak," it said through the radio, through the air, through his own mind. "Now we'll teach the others." By morning, only Vance's helmet was found, cracked, filled with water that rippled faintly though there was no wind. The search team that arrived days later heard whispers in the fog, faint and distorted, repeating their names one by one. Each night, new voices joined the chorus, and when the mist thickened enough, some swore they saw it. The shape of a man standing among the trees, smiling with 100 mouths, calling their names in perfect imitation. By the seventh night, the forest was no longer just surrounding them. It was alive, moving, breathing in a rhythm that didn't belong to nature. The air itself seemed thicker, almost sentient, vibrating softly like the world was exhaling through unseen lungs. Captain Vance ordered silence, but even silence had a pulse here. Every leaf shimmered faintly with moisture that wasn't rain. It was sweat, condensation, and something that smelled faintly of iron and decay. The fog never lifted that morning. The sun tried to rise, but the canopy above had thickened, its branches twisted into something unnatural. Mills swore the vines were in different positions every hour, subtly changing, creeping closer to camp whenever no one was watching. The ground had gone soft again, the soil slick like half-digested flesh. When one man drove his knife into the dirt to mark their coordinates, the ground bled. At first they thought it was an illusion, light playing tricks on tired eyes. But the blood smelled real, warm and sweet, seeping from the earth in slow pulses. Hale bent down to touch it, and before anyone could stop him, a vine snapped from the ground, wrapping around his wrist like a living rope. It didn't pull him in, not yet. It just held him there, trembling, almost tasting him. When he yanked free, his skin burned, welted with red circular scars that pulsed faintly. They packed to move camp again, but it was too late. The jungle had learned their scent, their movement, their fear. Every step they took made the ground twitch, roots rising like serpents beneath the mud. Vance ordered them to stay in formation, but his compass spun wildly, the needle jerking like it was alive. Mills muttered under his breath, "It's not a jungle anymore, sir. It's feeding." No one disagreed. By midday, the sound started, a low hum that came from everywhere at once. It wasn't wind, it wasn't insects. It was deeper, like something singing through the trees. The leaves began to vibrate in sync, shaking softly as if responding to the tone. Then, faintly between the hums came whispers, words they couldn't quite make out. But when they paused to listen, every whisper stopped. The jungle didn't want to be caught speaking. They stumbled across a clearing unlike the others, circular, unnaturally perfect, the trees around it stripped bare of bark. In the center stood what looked like a tree trunk, but its surface was slick and glistening, more like skin than wood. Embedded in it were pieces of metal, dog tags, bullet casings, fragments of radios. The men stood frozen. Mills whispered, "It's been eating soldiers." And then the tree moved. It groaned, shifting with a wet, cracking sound. The bark split open from top to bottom, revealing a hollow interior that pulsed with faint red light. Something inside was beating, slow and steady, like a heart. Hale dropped his rifle, his voice trembling. "It's alive." Vance raised his weapon, but before he could fire, a dozen vines shot outward, not to attack, but to listen. They brushed over the rifles, the men's faces, the trembling air, tasting the fear that radiated from them. The vines retracted, but the jungle didn't stay still. The canopy above began to twist, leaves curling inward like shutters closing around them. The hum returned, louder this time, turning into a low-frequency vibration that rattled their bones. One of the men clutched his ears, screaming as blood poured from his nose. The sound wasn't sound anymore, it was hunger. The jungle was calling something deeper beneath it to wake. The ground split open beneath their boots, veins of glowing sap crawling outward in patterns like arteries. From within the cracks, something rose, not a creature, not a plant, but both. It looked like the jungle had given itself a body, long limbs of bark and muscle, a face carved from roots. and eyes that glowed faintly like molten amber. It didn't walk. It crawled, its movements too fluid, too human. When it spoke, it didn't use a mouth. The voice came from everywhere, the ground, the trees, the air itself. "You brought it back," it said. The soldiers froze. "Brought what back?" Vance demanded. The voice shifted, sounding almost amused. "The sound that feeds us." Then from all around the forest echoed with static, the same radio noise that had followed them for days. The frequency had never left, it had been absorbed. Mills fell to his knees, clutching his head as the voices filled his mind. He heard screams, commands, names, all from the men who had vanished before. "They're still here," he cried. It kept them. The ground began to move again, bulging upward as faces pressed against the surface, their mouths opening and closing in silent agony. The jungle wasn't just feeding on their bodies, it was digesting their voices, their memories, their souls. The creature extended one arm toward them. Its fingers split into roots that slithered through the mud, wrapping gently around Mills's ankles. "Don't," Vance shouted, firing a burst into the vines. The bullets vanished into the bark with soft, dull thuds, absorbed like rain. The creature tilted its head, its eyes flickering brighter. "We learn," it said calmly. "We remember, we grow." Then the ground opened fully, swallowing Mills whole in one slow, deliberate motion. Vance screamed his name, but the forest only whispered it back, perfectly, in Mills' own voice. "It's okay, sir, I'm still here." The rest of the squad ran, but the jungle moved with them, closing in from all sides. Every root, every leaf, every breath of wind became part of the chase. The forest wasn't terrain anymore, it was predator, and they were already inside its mouth. They reached a ridge at last, where the trees thinned into black silhouettes against a pale sky. Vance turned to fire one last shot into the darkness, but there was nothing left to shoot at. The jungle had gone silent again, as if satisfied. Only one sound remained, faint, rhythmic, echoing from the ground below. It was chewing. By morning, Vance stood alone, his face grey and hollow. The clearing where his camp once stood was gone, replaced by fresh growth, green and vibrant. New vines coiled where his men had died, their leaves dripping with dew that smelled faintly of blood. Somewhere deep beneath the roots, the forest pulsed once more, whispering new names. The jungle had learned to feed, and now it would never stop. They say jungles grow back after war, but this one didn't. It remembered. The trees still carry the bullet holes. The vines still whisper names no living voice should know. When the military came years later, they found nothing. No bodies, no weapons, no remains. Just the faint outline of a camp that looked more grown than built, as if the forest itself had consumed it whole and digested every trace of man inside its roots. And yet, on stormy nights, the static returns. Locals say if you stand near the old ridge and tune a radio just right, you can hear it. The faint rhythm of boots on wet soil, the hiss of breath between gunfire, and then a voice calling your name. The same words, always the same. Hold your position. They tried to call it nature. They tried to call it legend. But the men who survived knew the truth. The jungle had learned more than hunger. It had learned the sound of command. It had learned the shape of fear. And now it waits. Because something out there still listens to our signals, not to answer them, but to follow them. And every time a new frequency hums through the air, the ground below shifts, as if waking up. So if you ever find yourself deep in a place that the maps forgot, where the trees lean too close, and the wind sounds almost human, don't call for help, don't say your name. Because something in that jungle still remembers how to speak it back. And it's still hungry.